life experiences, is, if you can pay attention, it's either going to stamp the answer or it's either going to scare you out of the answer.
He's put founders in rooms with Beyonce's father and billion-dollar deal makers. And he says your next podcast appearance could change everything. Welcome back to The Root of All Success. I am the real Jason Duncan, and this is episode number 341. My guest is Shawn Anthony, media power broker, podcast strategist, and the founder of Pod Pro Max. He's the man behind the curtain for some of the biggest names in business, including Matthew Knowles, Grammy winner Christette Michele, and billion-dollar fintech founder Sanira Mahini. From building his own platform with schools over now what to engineering high-impact media that drives real revenue, Shawn has cracked the code on turning podcast appearances into partnerships, speaking deals, and serious business growth. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here, Jason, and let's do this.
All right. Well, you've helped clients turn a single podcast appearance into seven-figure partnership. So what's the difference between founders who use media as leverage versus those who just collect vanity exposure?
Yeah, I mean, the founder that's using media the correct way, they're stacking it up. You know, there's this thing called 7-11-4. I wish I created it, but Google did. And that's when someone, before they make a buy or purchase, they want to be able to know, like, and trust you. And do you have 7 hours of content? Are you in 11 different touch points? And are you in 4 different locations? And the founders that are doing podcasts correctly, they're doing that. They're stacking it and they're doing podcast tours.
So before Podcast Pro Max, what was the moment you realized that visibility, not done right, of course, could be more valuable than traditional marketing?
Oh, absolutely. Before I created Pod Pro Max and founded it, when I fully became an entrepreneur back in 2021, I started this thing called brand management of some of the talent that was on my podcast. And it was one podcast in particular that I put a client on. And within the first 30 days, Jason, I saw her make over $1 million. And for me, that was the aha moment. It was really about connecting people, being the guest in the chair, not only being the person who operated and hosted the show and had their own podcast.
Now, you call yourself a media power broker. So how did that identity take shape, and when did you start owning that identity publicly?
Yeah, when you think about power broking, you think about some of the best people in the space, and primarily you start thinking entertainment, you start thinking sports, you start thinking about people like Rich Paul. Very similar to the media space, I've brokered and put the right people together, connected people who didn't have any idea that each other existed and they should be partners, and they've been able to do some really cool, lucrative things. And I think that's where we felt very comfortable realizing what our strength was, and that is power broking the deal before it even happens.
So you've built relationships with major platforms like iHeartRadio. You've placed clients alongside names like Angela Yee. So if you think back over your career, Shawn, what's one deal or placement that almost didn't happen, and then what saved it?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things when I think about placement of things like almost like never happened at all. A lot of times in media, the opportunities that really get people excited are the ones that are trendy, that are newsworthy. And a lot of opportunities that we found out that were really significant were ones that were seasonal. You think about people who have topics that they cover like taxes or finances. Well, this is the perfect time of year where you start thinking about those things. And so at that particular moment, we're able to then pitch, a talent or a client towards these shows and opportunities to make it happen. And then I'll tell you something even crazier. There's even times as hosts, real big famous hosts, their structure changes, their programming changes. The host may give you a call out and be sick. And I've seen some of the best conversations happen because only one person showed up to air and not all three. And so that just teaches you how important it is to be ready at all times. You just never know when's the right time for you.
Building a business like this around relationships and access is, of course, as you know, high risk. Has there been a time when you had to walk away from a client or an opportunity because it didn't align with your standards?
Yeah, I think 100%. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is that we are heavy referral based, right? And one of the cool things about that is you always want to vet people and make sure you're asking the right preliminary questions. Basically, you want to ask, hey, have you ever, been able to achieve this amount of success before? What are some things you've worked on? What are some obstacles, right? What are some things, and in industry talks, people talk to each other. And if you do right by people, it's very easy to spot the good guys from the bad ones. And so we highly pride ourselves on working with the right people, being very referral based. And I would say without a doubt, that's the way you make sure that the high risk has not only just a high risk, but a greater reward and connectivity.
Now, let's talk about just the basics of podcasting. Now, obviously, we're on a podcast right now. I'm the host. This is episode number 341. I've been doing this a while. You've been on dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of podcasts. I've been on probably 100 podcasts. But the average listener out there, I don't think they understand what goes into making a podcast. I think a lot of times they think, well, you just show up with your video on Zoom and you get a microphone, you just start talking. But what's really going on behind the scenes in a podcast from your position?
Yeah, for my position, it depends on exactly what type of show it is. That now there's so many different categories. When I created Schools Over Now What the podcast back in 2018, I was able to turn that podcast into a six-figure side hustle. And when I did that, this is where I really understood, okay, podcast has a lot of logistics. You have to think about the topics, the subject matter. If you're a guest-based show, do you have the right guests? And you also have to be able to take a survey of your audience to understand how you can get better. So if you're doing a whole bunch of interviews, a quick survey to your audience may reveal that they like listening to you more than your guest. And that might help you with the structure of your show. It might help you with understanding what kind of feedback so that you can become better. So as a podcaster, yes, it's a lot of work, but you also have to look around and figure, okay, how can I get better? And then there was this evolution of video. You think about 2018, and podcast still is heavily driven through audio based platforms, but there are people who like the YouTube experience. And so that's elevated the thinking level of, okay, if I were to record a season, where would I do it at? Would I do it at a studio? Would I do it at a home? And so we've learned so much over the years that podcasting will continue to evolve.
Now, a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, think that getting on the podcast is the goal, but you're saying it's just the beginning. So what do most people miss about the real ROI of media exposure on a podcast?
Yeah, you are borrowing an audience that trusted hosts. There are people right now who listen to Jason Duncan the same way anyone else would view Seth Meyers, or same way, or Jimmy Fallon. Like there are people who are raving fans of Jason that have no idea that Shawn Anthony exists, and now Shawn Anthony is on his podcast and he's talking about what he's been able to do with podcasting. And I'm going to find someone in this audience that's listening to my voice that will resonate with this message that I never would have had access to. And so I think we undervalue, the value of borrowing a audience that trusts the host, that they're only going to vet out the right people to put right in front of them. And it accelerates a founder, it accelerates an executive from either status or perhaps the ability to gain their own audience.
Now, you created something called, I think it's called the Opportunity Pattern Recognition Framework. Opportunity Pattern Recognition Framework. So can you break that down? Like, what does that mean, and how can founders start using that?
Yeah, well, I found out that there is this huge thing that we don't recognize when we very first see it, and that's the opportunity that this person in front of me should be connected to somebody that I know. And there's a pattern of that. There's cues to that. There's dots that are constantly being connected, whether they're in conversational format or body cues, that this person aligns with something that I've seen before, which is a pattern that can be recognized. And if you can recognize that, which I like to call the OPR framework, you're able to realize, okay, maybe this should be an opportunity that I should go after. These are the people that I should work together with. And this is how we can achieve those things. And it works very, very well with anyone in a leadership setting, anyone that is looking for influence or wanting to gain an audience of credibility.
All right, we're going to get back to Shawn in just a moment. But first, if you're getting value from these conversations here on The Root of All Success, I want you to make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. So go to youtube.com/therealJasonDuncan and hit that subscribe button. You're going to get every podcast episode. Plus, you're going to see exclusive videos on building and scaling businesses that are exitable, that you don't have to be a slave to. I teach on something called the Exit Without Exiting philosophy. It's based on a best-selling book that I wrote a few years ago, and also talk about the XOS method, which is the Exeter operating system. It includes things like the 3 tiers of entrepreneurial evolution and the 7 stages of the XOS method to get you from stuck in the business to being able to sell for the highest dollar amount possible. So go to youtube.com/therealJasonDuncan, and I'll see you over there. But now let me tell you about something that changed how I think about money and how I think about business cash flow. And that's our sponsor for today's episode, Bank on Yourself. If you've ever felt like banks hold all the cards when it comes to accessing capital, then this is for you. Bank on Yourself is a wealth building strategy that lets you create your own private source of funding. No banks, no gatekeepers, no applications, and your money grows predictably every single year. You can access it whenever you need it, and you can set your own terms for borrowing and repayment. I have been doing this since 2019, and just this year, last year, I was hitting about 22% return on my money. Now, that's not indicative of how you're going to have it. That's going to happen for you, but that's what happened for me. And savvy entrepreneurs are using this method to fund investments, to cover business expenses, to build wealth on their terms. And if you want to learn how it works, you can have a free 15-minute session with one of the experts that I trust to handle my money. All you got to do is go to therealJasonDuncan.com/bank on yourself. That's therealJasonDuncan.com/bank on yourself. You can book a confidential session with a specialist who can show you exactly how this fits into your financial goals. Take charge of your financial future today. Now let's get back to the show with my guest, Shawn Anthony. Shawn, you've worked with everybody from Grammy winners to fintech founders. So what do you think is the biggest misconception high achievers have about their own media presence?
That they physically have to move and go be in front of somebody. There is this thing that's happening right now in media. If you look at the top charts and some of the shows on the platforms like Apple, Spotify, Podbean, anywhere that you consume podcasts, there are a lot of top shows that interview guests only virtual, meaning that there isn't an in-person element. I think a lot of times when we see podcasts, we think just because a podcast has an in-person element is a huge show because a guest is in front of them. There are really big shows who have no body at all. They're just virtual opportunities that have run that we seen go to the top of the charts. I'll use one as an example. Mick Hunt Unplugged podcast. It is one of the largest.
Say that again, because I didn't hear what you said. Say that again.
Mick Hunt. So Mick.
Okay, Mick Hunt.
Mick Hunt. You can look it up. The Unplugged podcast. We've placed 8 clients on his show just in the month of July alone. And it was #1 in the entire world in all categories on Apple for almost 2 weeks. He's constantly now in the top charts in the business category, but there's no in-person interview element. They're all virtual interviews. And I think a lot of founders and executives and CEOs, they think they have to disrupt their schedule and get on a plane and go somewhere to reach a large audience. They could be sitting right here with Jason doing a virtual interview, reaching a huge audience. And so I think that's probably what the biggest misconception.
You know what? I'm really glad that you said that. I just pulled up Mick's website, so MickHuntOfficial.com. I assume that's the same guy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's him. That's him.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah, that's him. Mick Unplugged. Okay, so I just looked that up, but I'm glad you said that because my own journey in podcasting, when I started, I was convinced that I had to do it in person, sitting down across somebody. So I went and bought all the equipment, the cameras, the microphones, and the lights. And I didn't have my own studio, so I was using this place. There's a club downtown Nashville called the Standard Club, and they let me use their club to do the recording. And I probably recorded 40 or 50 episodes, maybe 60 episodes in that location before somebody, actually a potential guest, convinced me to go virtual, because I started recording in 2020, and of course in 2021 I'm still doing podcasts in person, and I was refusing to do any virtuals. And it was 2021. So think about what was going on in the world. And so people were saying, man, you got to do these virtual. I started doing virtual. And then for a while, that's all I did. Now, right now, I don't have any in person podcasts scheduled, but I miss doing them in person. And I want to go back to doing some in person, if not all. But here's what I've discovered, Shawn, I've discovered that the production quality and my questions and the interaction with the guests sometimes is better, just like what I'm doing right now, because I can see my questions, I can see you, I've got notes in front of me. Or if I'm in person, I might not have that ability because it looks bad if I look down and look at my notes. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. If you had to look at the top podcasts of the world right now, and I use
Mhm.
Mick as an example, how many of those are in person versus virtual?
It depends on the element. As far as the interview based shows, you think about some of the shows that are the top in the world. Whether it's Andy Friselda, or Patrick Bet Dave, like a lot of those shows, they have their own in person studios, and it's just them, or they'll have like their own like in house crew, and it's just them. So but they're still. You can even look at very very good podcasters who have assembled from the sports realm and gotten national TV deals like Pat McAfee. Like he's still doing virtual interviews. He's literally hosting the show, doing a whole bunch of virtual interviews. Now, granted, there's sometimes someone comes into the studio, but so I would say a lot of those shows, if you were to look at a percentage based off of them, the ones that are doing it the best have found ways to make it feel more exclusive that come with a cost, like Patreon or like the Joe Budden podcast and all those different things. So you're probably looking at anywhere I would say roughly about 70%, probably about a 70%, 30% ratio right now. The people who are really pushing out like the in-person studio vibes are typically involved with some type of network that has picked up the cost, or they are a founder or CEO who's fronting the thing and saying, you know what, I'm going to go at this for a season to see where it goes. And it's pretty obvious.
So you talk about being remembered, not just seen. So what's one tactical move that a founder could make on their next podcast interview to actually stick in the host and then the audience's mind?
Yeah, it would be just give away everything you absolutely know, even the things that people have paid you thousands for, because you have a lot more left. And what's going to capture someone's attention? That if I'm going to listen to this podcast, this is the one thing I've learned from this podcast host that was better than any other guest. And you know it, Jason, especially as a podcast host yourself. When you've asked a guest a question, they've told you something you've never heard before, and you won't ever forget it. And I think that's the way you win, is that you give it all away, because you only have that one moment to really connect with that person's audience. And you only have that one moment to be such a rock star where that person's like, you know what? I'm going to have this person on every 6 months. Right. And so, and that's like a really earned opportunity based off of what that audience's response level has been like. If you really, really study this, you notice who's been a really good podcaster and who's been a really good podcast guest, because you start seeing them everywhere. And you're like, oh wow, why is Neil Patel interviewing them? Oh, they do well. Why is Lewis Howes interviewing them? Because they're seeing from the YouTube data, the analytics, that this person's giving a phenomenal interview. My audience needs to hear it. So as a CEO or founder, you just gotta knock the ball out of the park and be who you are and just give it all away and see where it goes.
Speaking of giving it away versus charging people for it, what are your thoughts on paying to be on podcasts versus just being on podcasts as a guest who doesn't have to pay to be there?
Yeah, I'm a full supporter of someone saying, you know what, I am going to earn this opportunity, and I'm going to either hire a company that can hunt down and find me the right opportunities. So it's a genuine connection. What makes Pop Max, our company, so uniquely cool is that we're like really good matchmakers. In other words, there's people, Jason, we probably had on your show like that. Like we're really good matchmakers of understanding if I'm this host, is this the right person for my audience? And we do that by studying and understanding who their audience is and what are some of the things that they like, or what's the demographic, what's the age, what are the topics, what are past guests. And so when you're coming from that perspective, that conversation always wins. There is a PR strategy that has been going on for decades, well, probably more beyond that, that a lot of people just aren't aware of, and that is media buying. So, like, if you ever see like a really famous person or all of the press and media doing a book tour, they're buying their airtime, not necessarily maybe them, but there might be a company that has bought that time out to then promote or talk about those topics. And so I always feel earned media outbeats paid media. Only time I feel like paid media could outbeat earned media is if paid media comes with advertisement and ads and all those radio style like things.
What's something that you used to believe that you don't believe anymore?
Uh, let's see. I'm starting to believe uh, that you do not need to show up everywhere all the time. There's this thing where there's this mystique that's happening. And if you are putting out a lot of content, it doesn't mean you don't need to put out a lot of content. It doesn't mean you don't need to be visible. But there's this mystique thing that's happening where the right people are. It's very similar to an artist, very similar to the industry where there's people who can release certain projects certain times of the year. There was this thing that happened where Beyonce changed the entire music industry in literally one night, and that was dropping an album that nobody knew was coming. It was no longer depending upon all of this promotion, all of this advertisement. And so I no longer believe that you have to always be out there. I believe that you could be mysterious. You could pop out selectively. You can pick out which platform you want to show up the least on and be more intentional. Think about Instagram being treated more like a photo album that you would show your kids, because now you look at it like I've changed this completely. Like, you go through my timeline, it almost feels like you're going through history with me. I think that's the new sauce.
So, the name of this show is The Root of All Success. So, I got to ask some success based questions. If you look back in your career, Shawn, what's one key that unlocks success for you more than anything else?
I give you experience. It was the first time I knew I could really do things on my own, and I could really believe in myself and go after this in a space. I was at Ed Milet's house. You may be very familiar with Ed Milet. I've heard that name. I'd be shocked if the audience
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
heard him. Um, I had the opportunity to interview Ed Milet. It was episode 41. It was 2019. It was the first time I ever got on a plane. I flew to the Laguna. I was at his home in Laguna, and we had such a good conversation before the interview. And after the interview, he says, "Shawn, you're unique. You don't look like everyone else. You talk a little bit different. If you just continue to do this, if you just stay focused, man, in this, you're gonna go places." And that unlocked it for me. Podcasting became a six-figure side hustle that later on became Pop Pro Max. So I think that's definitely one of the many things I would say.
How do you personally define that word success?
It's depending upon what you find successful. There's people who right now would be satisfied with where I'm at and call it success. I'm trying to climb the next thing. And I think, to me, success is defined by the person who is setting the level, right? And I think that, to me, is the definition of success.
And based on that definition, do you consider yourself successful?
Oh, for my age, absolutely. You know, absolutely, man. Absolutely, man. God be the glory, man. Absolutely. I come from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Nickname, you can look it up. It's called Murder Mount. I survived. I was able to go to college. I graduated. I've done the things. Raised a family, married, all those good things. And so, by far, yes, absolutely.
What is your one best piece of advice for all entrepreneurs?
Don't listen to anybody. There's like when I say don't listen to anybody, and it's usually you already know the answer, And life experiences is either going to, if you can pay attention, it's either going to stamp the answer or it's either going to scare you out of the answer. Right? If you're listening to this right now, even if you aren't a full-time entrepreneur, like I listen, Jason, I know what it feels like to be, the manager of a building and everyone's calling you. You can't even get a bathroom break, and then you want to go post on Instagram, promote your product, your course. I know what it feels like. There's nothing more hungrier than that. And what you have to do is get away from that environment. Life is about environments. You get in a different environment, there is no stopping you. There's no stopping you.
All right. As we close our conversation today, I have 3 rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Best podcast interview you've ever heard. Not one you placed, but one you listened to.
That's tough. There's one with this came out with Steve Stout and Immigrant. Check that out, Steve Stout.
Steve Stout. All right. If you could get any entrepreneur in history on a podcast stage, dead or alive, who would it be?
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson. Why? I gotta follow up. Why is that?
Oh man, this guy was so great. I mean, this guy was so good that the only way they could get him out of his spot was to trick him out of his spot. That's how good he was. If you really do your research on Michael Jackson, I think this guy was very close to pretty much buying all of Marvel. Do you know what that would have done? So the fact that he was owning everything that everyone was listening to. Oh, he was dangerous, man.
All right, last one. What's one thing most people don't know about Shawn Anthony?
Hey, I'm actually very funny. One of the things about the downside to being this mysterious or selectively timelining historical content on Instagram, the downside of that is, my wife always said, my friend said, man, I'm hilarious, man. I'm hilarious. Some of my best times I've had, most funniest times I've had, are with the most simplest things and some of the most coolest people, man. I was last month. I had so much fun eating extra dry chicken wings and a bottle of champagne with Mr. Matthew Knowles, and while he was cutting and doing deals at nighttime. It's just iconic stuff, man. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, that to me is that's the fun stuff.
All right, man. So now you've got everybody intrigued. They want to get on more podcasts. What do they need to do? How do they get in touch with you? How do they make this work?
Yeah. And, first you got to ask yourself, why do you want to get on more podcasts? And then 2, you have to ask yourself, okay, how fast do I want to really do this? Do I want to do this myself? And if that's the case, you have to be, due diligent, be patient, put yourself out there. What you do it the right way is you find a company that's been very successful at taking talent, founders, executives, CEOs, and doing it for them. And that's what we do at Pod Pro Max. We strategically look for these opportunities. Just last year alone, we placed clients in over 700 podcasts. We completed over 40 plus podcast tours. And so to get in touch with us, you just simply visit podpromax.com. Just go ahead and hit the step inside button. And then we'll have like a quick survey to make sure this is the right opportunity for you. And we'll be in touch.
All right. That's podpromax.com. Go check out Shawn Anthony on Instagram at Shawn R. Anthony _. Go check him out and you get the history, his timeline history. You can see what's going on, how he's growing, where he's going, and what he's doing in life. Shawn, thank you so much for being on this show today. It's an honor to talk to you, and congratulations on your success. And thanks for being on my show today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jason, and I absolutely love this.
All right, you know what time it is. It's time for another edition of JD's Public Service Rants. This is where I call out the little things that really shouldn't have to be said, but clearly they do. So if you're guilty of this one, well, consider yourself officially put on notice. And I'm talking to you, Gary, the guy who fires up a leaf blower at 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning like you're being paid by the minute. Listen, Saturday morning is sacred. It's the one day that most of us don't have to set an alarm. The one morning that we get to sleep in, enjoy some peace, maybe wake up slowly with a cup of coffee instead of a heart attack. And then Here comes Gary next door sounding like he's prepping for a takeoff in an aircraft carrier. Here's the thing. The leaves will still be there at 10 a.m. The grass isn't going anywhere. There is no lawn emergency. Nobody has ever called 911 because their neighbor's yard was slightly overgrown for 3 more hours. If you're out there mowing before 9 a.m. on a Saturday, you're not being productive. You're being a villain. You're the reason people move to the country. You're the reason noise ordinances exist. So please, I'm begging you, let the neighborhood sleep. Your lawn can wait. Our sanity cannot. Well, that's it for today's JD's Public Service Rant. If you got an idea for one of these, send it my way. And remember, don't be that guy. All right. Well, there you have it. Another successful entrepreneur about his journey to success. Listen, being on podcast is something that I don't think you understand how important it is. And as we talked about with Shawn today, getting on shows could be a leverage point to launch you into that next stratosphere. I personally have made hundreds of thousands of dollars hosting a show and being guests on the show. And so the investment of time and energy and money to get on shows is more often than not worth it. Now, are there some duds? Sure. You got to kiss a few frogs before you get to the prince, as they say. But you know what? It's all learning. It's all getting there. I've been on shows that I thought were absolutely ridiculous and terrible. I don't know how many people are listening to it. Frankly, I don't even keep up with listener counts on my show because that's not why I do it. I'm not here for the vanity metrics. I'm here for the connections. So what do you need to do to get on more shows in 2026? Well, I would say contact podpromax.com. Talk to Shawn's team. See about getting on more shows. And if you're interested in being a guest on The Root of All Success, all you got to do is go to therootofallsuccess.com, scroll to the bottom, and hit apply to be on the show. You'll see who we interview right there and what the qualifications are, but we could get you on this show too. But again, I am your host, the real Jason Duncan. Thanks for listening. Tune in again next week. We'll talk with yet another very successful entrepreneur about his or her journey to success. Until then, as always, Jesus is King.
Attention business owners. Attention business owners. Feeling burnout from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.